As I've been going through some sites recently for accessibility audits, I've noticed something that I think the visual website building tools have actually ended up turning into a more common problem than I realized. It's a list spread into multiple columns. These should be using CSS columns, and I'm not sure why this is something that seems completely left out of visual building tools. Lists are great. They help break up walls of text. It helps with outlining things like features. And for our purposes, there are two different types of lists. We have short and long. Most of the time, short lists should be within the flow of the content. But you don't want to just split out 4 list items into 3 columns and still have that list look to them. If it's something that you feel should be split into columns to better call them out, that's when you can start looking into some kind of alternative layout. An example of an alternative is using things like styled boxes as a type of call-out box. Things like lists of services or categories are often laid out like this, using things like images and icons and blurbs to make it easier to read through the list and stay engaged with the content. Now, long lists are what I'm talking about when I say that lists and columns should be using CSS columns. There's no exact number of list items to qualify it as a long list. If your list starts to get long enough to have eyes glaze over while reading it, or you have to go back and reread the paragraph before it, or you just end up skipping over list items because it's just so hard to take it all in, the first question that you can ask is, can this list be sorted and broken up into smaller lists? You don't want to just break up lists because they're long, but usually long lists can be recategorized and broken up to improve readability and understanding. You can give an intro for each list with headings and paragraph text where it makes sense. It's an opportunity to dive deeper into these things and keep the general information as general. You can then take these smaller lists and put them into columns if that still makes sense for the new page layout. You can also take these lists and follow the same method of using boxes as the short lists, but too many boxes could end up making a long list feel even longer or harder to follow, so just keep that in mind when you're recreating these list layouts. Most of the time, unless you know CSS and your platform allows you to add it, you'll grab a container, add some columns, and then add a list into each of those columns. It's technically separate lists, but the hope is that someone can look at that area visually and assume it's one group of related items. But it still ends up as one big long list on smaller screens. And sometimes you have to take extra steps to make sure that the spacing adjusts between those columns with the screen sizes so that they still look like one long list. And pretty much 100% of the time, these lists are added as separate blocks or widgets, which makes them separate lists in the code, which translates to separate lists for things like screen readers. This makes the page harder to understand and a lot more annoying to navigate through. So how do we do this the right way? When you have a single list that you want to display in multiple columns, use CSS columns to customize the layout of the list. It's a much more straightforward way to put text into columns without the complexity that Flexbox and Grid can bring, while still providing the options to customize the way the columns look. CSS columns have come a long way, but visual builders don't make that easy to do. We shouldn't have to be forced to put a list into multiple separate containers and hopefully select the correct HTML for every element if that's an option that the builder even allows you to do. The container method is a lot more common of a way to set up the callout box method because a lot of builders tend to prioritize container use. So as long as you can select the correct HTML, this is a fine way to accomplish this. Depending on the layout, these callout boxes will end up using flex and grid over the column count method anyway. But if it's just a simple list that you want to break into columns, you would have to end up creating separate elements for each one of those list items and then selecting the correct HTML for each one of those things. Visual builders don't make every option available for every element, so there aren't enough options available to you to make the list look how you want it to without writing custom CSS. Most builders do at least let you add a class to some portion, so either on the container or the list element itself, which you can then use to write some CSS. There might even be a class that you can use that comes with your builder to make something look like one of the layouts that already exists. Side note, if this sounds like your builder, reach out to them. If they gave you a column count option, that would be the best way to fix this. But at the very least, you should be able to select the proper HTML for an element. But there really is no easy way to do this without code. Hopefully, I can help make this something that's a little more straightforward for you to add if you need to. So to add CSS to your site, you'll want to look for the site-wide option. The site editor has an additional CSS area. A lot of builders also have a CSS area. There are plugins that let you add CSS to your site as well. You can also add CSS to individual blocks. There is the option to do it in the block editor, and there are sometimes options available in your builder as well to do this. So to start, if you're using the site-wide option, you'll type in the class and an opening and closing curly bracket. Between these brackets, you'll need to add column-width, colon, and your desired column width in pixels. That's it. It will adjust the number of columns based on your screen size, and you can put this either in a class or directly into the CSS of that particular element. If you want a little more control over the number of columns, that's when you can use column-count. For this method, you'll need to add column-count, colon, and the number of columns that you want. You'll add a media query or two at the screen size that you need it to adjust. So if you take a look at the page, drag in the browser window, and see when your lists need to be adjusted, you can go that route. Sometimes the site will have some sort of standard breakpoints that it's using, so you can look those up. In this case, we'll just say at 500 pixels, we'll go to 2 columns, and at 300 pixels, we'll go to 1. And CSS columns have a ton of other styling options as well. For example, if you need to, you can add column-gap. This can help keep columns from squishing too close together, but take a look at your site and see if you need it or not. If you're adding additional styles like column gap, column width, anything else that you need for all of your lists that are in columns no matter what, I would add those to a general something like list-as-column class and add everything but column count into that class and add that class to any of these lists. And then you'll need a second class for the number of columns you want this element to have. So maybe I have one list that uses 4 columns. I'll say list as columns 4. Add that class to the element and the list will break into 4 columns. Then I'll add in some media queries for the sizes that I want the columns to change. So say 768, 540, and 320. And under each of those, I'll drop the number of columns down until we get to 1. Maybe I have a list that also uses 3 columns. I'll add a similar class for 3 columns. Add the initial column count, and then I can insert this class into the media queries that I already created. I don't need it on the first one because it's already at 3, so I'll add it to the 2 other that are smaller than 3. And then if I have another list that uses 2 columns, I'll add the initial CSS for column count 2, and then add it to the last media query because the other 2 are greater or equal to 2. And now you can use those classes wherever you need to break up your list into 2, 3, or 4 columns. You can use all these things together, or you can stick with just column width, but CSS columns provide the flexibility to work with all kinds of skill levels and code methods, and it should absolutely be the go-to method for putting lists in columns. This is something that I'd love to see visual builders start to implement for lists. Allow someone to choose the column width or even the column count and gap for a list element. A couple of final notes on lists. If you're creating a design to hand off to someone, include notes next to things that should be marked up as lists. And the same rules for lists in general still apply to lists in multiple columns. Don't use fake lists with dashes and line breaks. Use the right list type for your list, and don't over-nest lists. Generally keep it to 1 or 2 levels deep. So next time you want to split up your lists into columns, you're now ready to make good choices for your content and for the people coming to your site.